Here are some of the most interesting facts related to flying. Number 10. Not really locked. If it's a short flight, most people would just hold it. But if it's a longer flight, it's impossible to avoid using the airplane restroom at least once. It's definitely not recommended to remain completely seated on flights, especially long-haul 12-hour plus flights. If you're immobile for too long, it's much more likely for your body to get blood clots. Most people assume that once they lock the bathroom door behind them, they're in a safe little haven. But guess what? You're not. Even though you're under the impression that you're locked inside and that you're in control of the situation, that's definitely not the case. If a flight attendant, or someone else, needs to rescue someone from the bathroom, they're able to do so. This means that someone can't truly lock themselves in the airplane bathroom, whether that's a good or bad thing. There's a hinged panel that can be lifted up to reveal a secret locking bolt that can be used to lock or unlock doors from the outside. Who knows how many times a flight attendant has had to rescue someone from the bathroom, or maybe interrupt anything that shouldn't be going on. Number 9. Not thirsty anymore. The next time the drink cart passes during your flight, you might want to think twice before asking for a cup of tap water, hot tea, or coffee. According to one flight attendant, the tanks that store water on planes are rarely cleaned. While airlines say the water meets regulations and is safe to drink, studies show that these water storage tanks can be a breeding ground for bacteria. Back in 2004, the EPA sampled water in the storage tanks for more than 300 planes and found that 15% of the samples contained the bacteria coliform, the common bacteria found in poo. EPA data also showed that tap water on 12% of commercial airplanes in the U.S. tested positive for coliform at least once. You would think that the drinking water would be cleaner than tap water, right? The good news is, when aircraft water tests positive for coliform or E. coli, airlines are required by the EPA to disinfect and flush out the water tanks and resample the water until it is free of bacteria. However, is that always the case? Number 8. A dull taste. If you think the food you eat up in the air is bland or unappetizing, it's not necessarily the airline's fault. Essentially, you leave your normal sense of taste behind at the airport departure gate. Getting on an airplane and cruising at an altitude thousands of feet in the air affects the way your taste buds work. The flavor of everything from a pasta dish to a mouthful of wine becomes manipulated in a whole host of ways that we are only beginning to understand. Taste buds and sense of smell become dull at 30,000 feet. Our perception of saltiness and sweetness drops when inside a pressurized cabin. There are several reasons for this. There's a lack of humidity, there's lower air pressure, and then there's also a bunch of background noise. Yes, sound has been proven to affect taste as well. Research has found that perceived saltiness and sweetness is less intense when food is eaten with the presence of loud background noise. When you step on an airplane, the atmosphere inside the cabin affects your sense of smell first. At about 30,000 feet, the humidity is typically less than 12%, drier than most deserts. The combination of dryness, low pressure, and loud noises reduces the sensitivity of your taste buds of sweet and salty foods by around 30%. Number 7. Dangling masks. How do oxygen masks actually work? Is it actually about safety, or is it just an elaborate way of intoxicating passengers to keep them happy as their plane plummets to Earth? Arguably a theory popularized by the movie Fight Club. Oxygen masks really are there for your safety. More specifically, it's all about cabin pressure. In fact, if you don't put on the masks, what's described in Fight Club will actually happen. If the cabin really has lost pressure, hypoxia, or basically a lack of oxygen, will quickly take effect on your brain with symptoms including nausea and headaches. However, you'll also reach that euphoric state that you heard about. The air at high altitudes is thin and oxygen levels are very low. Airplanes maintain cabin pressure at a level equivalent to an altitude of around 5,000 to 8,000 feet. And how long does the oxygen actually last? On typical airplanes, the oxygen will last 10 to 14 minutes. That's more than enough time for pilots to guide the plane to a safe altitude. According to Airbus, if a plane loses pressure at 40,000 feet, passengers have as little as 18 seconds of, quote, useful consciousness without supplemental oxygen. Once that euphoria is over, hypoxia knocks you unconscious and can cause brain damage, and of course, you know what. So if you ever find yourself on a flight with oxygen mask dangling in front of you, yep, put it on. Number 6. Dirty laundry. Okay, airplanes are dirty for the most part, but not everything is dirty, right? What about things that come in a bag? Just because a blanket that's given to you is wrapped in a plastic bag doesn't mean that you're the first person to use it. Nor does it even mean that it's been washed. The only deep clean on planes happens overnight, and some airlines even reuse their blankets without washing them. That blanket most likely has had at least another person snuggling up with the blanket before you. Nice. Every airline has some sort of cleaning between each flight, whether it's by flight attendants or a maintenance crew. But these cleanings are often just more for trash collection and a bit of vacuuming. In economy class, clean blankets are only given to the first flight of the day. After that, they're just refolded and reused. The only deep clean of the day happens overnight when a team of cleaners will wipe down seats and tray tables with disinfectants and properly scrub the bathrooms. That means that people flying the first flight of the day get the cleanest plane of all, and it's all downhill from there. So while an early wake-up call isn't much fun, it does have that one perk when it comes to flying. Your seat was just cleaned. Number 5. Different meals. This one kind of reminds me of the person tasting a king's meal before he eats it just so the king is safe. The safety of airline passengers, of course, is on the pilots. So when commercial airline pilots show up to work, they have a very different rule set than the rest of us on the ground. One of those rules is that pilots and co-pilots are required to eat different meals. While this rule may seem like it's not that important, there's actually very good reasoning behind it. It definitely makes sense to make sure both pilots don't get food poisoning from the same dish. What are the chances that both the different dishes pilots eat tainted though? Well, food poisoning on board airplanes is pretty rare, although it does happen from time to time. For example, way back in 1982, some bad tapioca pudding incapacitated 10 crew members, including the pilot, co-pilot, and flight engineer, on a flight from Boston to Lisbon. The good news is that the flight was able to turn around and land back in Boston without further incident. So even though food poisoning of pilots might still be rare, it's still better safe than sorry. Number 4. Boarding process. Most airlines board their most loyal customers first because they're the airline's top paying customers. That definitely makes sense from an airline's point of view. You want to give your best paying customers the best treatment. However, there's a more efficient way to load an airplane with passengers. The most efficient way to board passengers is to get people to put their luggage away as fast as possible. That means not having passengers having to wait for passengers putting up their luggage. In other words, it's better to make passenger boarding in a parallel process where multiple actions occur simultaneously. The first wave of passengers could be in order, such as boarding from the back with 30A, 28A, 26A, 24A, and so on. For a typical airplane, there would be 12 such waves, one of each seat in a row, and for odd and even rows. In field tests, this method has outperformed all other arrangements. In a test with 72 passengers, it was nearly twice as fast boarding back to front or in rotating blocks of rows. It's 20 to 30% faster than other boarding methods, such as random boarding, when people get on with their airline status instead, without regard to where their assigned seats are. Number 3. Undercover cops. How many of you guys have gotten arrested while flying? We hope that the number is 0. Maybe a better question is, how many of you guys knew that flight attendants can arrest you? Surprisingly, the pilot in command of an aircraft has a near absolute authority to command anyone aboard the airplane to do anything necessary to ensure the safety of the aircraft and all those people on board. The cabin crew isn't far behind. Just because someone is up in the air, that doesn't mean they can't get arrested for doing something inappropriate. All cabin crew members have the right of arrest anyone on board an aircraft during a flight. The flight attendant is primarily a safety professional. The flight attendants just need to complain and consult the pilot. Once they have the green light, they have every right to take the measures they feel are appropriate. In more urgent situations, this right is considered delegated, so flight attendants don't even have to inform the captain. The arresting act usually happens through brute force combined with whatever is on hand to restrain the person. There are plenty of photos online of various people restrained mid-air with duct tape, plastic wrap, and seatbelts. Most of these incidents just come from people who've had way too much to drink. Really, heavy drinking and flying don't really mix, but sure, why not? Number 2, hail damage. Not many people think about hail being a potential issue when it comes to flying because hail just doesn't happen that often in most places. However, even with all the technological advances, there's still no prevention for something so simple that can cause a ton of damage. According to pilots, hail is more or less invisible until you run into it. Flying at night and having the skies dark at the time when hail happens doesn't help either. An interesting fact is that hail doesn't just come out of the bottom of clouds, but hail can be ejected from the top of some larger storms. Large thunderstorms have both updrafts and downdrafts. When hail is caught in an updraft, it can be thrown out the top of the storm up for dozens of miles. Obviously, hail getting into the engines can be a potential problem. Even though this is unlikely, it's still possible. One American Airlines plane had to learn this the hard way back earlier in 2018. Flight 1897, flying from San Antonio to Phoenix, diverted to El Paso after flying into a big hailstorm that severely damaged the nose. No injuries were reported, but there were multiple sick passengers because of the severe turbulence. Apparently, the plane dropped like a roller coaster in the sky, according to some passengers. Not sure about you guys, but that'd probably make us sick too. Radar indicated that the hailstones were about 1.5 inches across, bigger than golf balls. However, meteorologist Jeff Piotrowski indicated that they may have been 2 to 3 inches in diameter, approaching baseball-sized hail. Number 1. Safest seat. Where exactly is the safest seat on a plane? Popular opinion has it that the rear of an aircraft is the safest place to be. The theory is actually supported by several studies, one of which was an interesting experiment performed during the making of a plane crash documentary. The producers of the documentary, The Crash, arranged for a Boeing 727 carrying cameras, sensors, and crash test dummies with breakable bones to be deliberately crashed into the Sonoran Desert in Mexico. What happened? Well, after hitting the ground, the front of the plane and the first 11 rows of seats, essentially first class, business class, and premium economy passengers, did not make it. A force of 12 Gs were recorded in this section of the aircraft. Experts concluded that none of the plane's first-class passengers would have survived, but 78% of the other passengers would have, with the chance of survival increasing the closer they were sitting to the rear of the aircraft. Here's what's next.